Greetings. This is the educator from the Ministry of the Real Truth. And I recall either the Aramaic New Testament or Disciples New Testament translator Victor Alexander stating on his website about how the British in World War I enlisted the Assyrians or the Mesopotamians into their army with the promise of returning their land to them afterwards, something like that, and then reneged. In other words, they basically didn't follow up with their promise and possibly stole their land, as they've done through to many others through their colonizations of those countries. So I happened to come across this history of the Assyrians of Urmia, Iran. This article online called Nineveh Online, or referred to as Nineveh Online. An article by Ariane Ishaya, PhD. Editorial note: this article was presented in the Middle East Studies Association MESA Conference 2001 in San Francisco in a panel titled The Assyrians of Iran, From Contributions to Diaspora. This article was published in JAAS Volume 16, Number 1, 2002. Setting the scene. As a rural community around the turn of the 20th century, the Assyrians of Urmia were uniquely in their urban and westernized lifestyle, not only in Iran but also perhaps in many countries of the Middle East. Urmia also distinguishes itself as one of the few historical sites that bear some etymological resemblance to the compound word coinages in Assyrian Aramaic. It seems to be a compound word, which in modern Assyrian matches the combination of the words place or city of water, Mir. The name attests to the antiquity of present day Assyrians in the region. 2/3 of this community perished during World War I. This brief historical and ethnographic sketch is to familiarise the reader with the community on a closer, more personal level, lest we should forget that each time a group perishes, all of us as members of the human family diminish in stature. The Assyrians were industrious and the most educated subjects of the region at the turn of the 20th century, and their demise deprived the plains of Urmia of a very productive segment of its population. The American educated Assyrians, such as Dr. Isaac Adams and Joseph Kinanshu, played the role of cultural operatives through their publications that introduced the English reading public to the culture, literature and socio-political institutions of the country. Persia, this ethnic profile is based primarily on Assyrian sources in the form of personal diaries, travel journals, Assyrian periodicals and family histories collected by the author. It is a history from the perspective of the Assyrians themselves. Until 1918, at which time they were uprooted from the region, the Assyrians lived in compact villages along the three rivers of Nazlu, Shahar and Barandus. These rivers flowed eastward towards the lake of Urmia from their sources in the Zagros Mountains bordering Turkey. Of a total of 300 villages in the region, 60 had exclusively Assyrian population and another 60 had a mixed Assyrian, Azari, Turkish and or Armenian population. The total number of Assyrians in the region at the turn of the century was estimated between 30 to 35,000, most of who lived in villages. The Assyrian population of the town of Urmia itself was only 600 people, or about 100 families. They lived in the special Christian quarter of the town. It is estimated that around 1900, 40% of the population of the region was Christian, Assyrian and Armenian. Okay, we have the Aramaic New Testament, translated by Victor N. Alexander, and in his translator's notes, he actually talks about the American missionaries. It's on page 4. The American missionaries of the 19th century attempted to translate scriptures into modern Aramaic, the ancient Aramaic into modern Aramaic or Syriac. They actually tried to translate their American Bible, which was the one they were using at the time, which was the King James. They tried to adapt it to the King James version and used by them at that time. So I'll read that again. The American missionaries of the 19th century attempted to translate the scriptures into modern Aramaic, Syriac, but botched it. Okay, we'll go further back because you need to go back a bit further to fully understand it. Joshua, or Isho, or Jesus the Messiah, preached and read the scriptures in this language, the ancient Aramaic, the language of Assyrian. Actually, go back a bit further than that. He spoke Galilean Aramaic. Okay. And Joshua, or Jesus the Messiah, preached and read the scriptures in this language. The ancient Aramaic is therefore the scribal language of the scriptures, and it is sacred. It is still being used in the liturgy of many Eastern churches today, including the Church of the East, of the Atarai, and the Orthodox Church of the Sorai in India. It is, however, a liturgical language which was not translated correctly until he, Victor N. Alexander, found out about the fact that it has never been translated into any modern vernacular or of any of the churches still using it. Okay, here's what I'm trying to get at in regards to the American missionaries in Urmia. The American missionaries of the 19th century attempted to translate the scripture into modern Aramaic or Syriac, but botched it as they adapted it to the King James version and used by them at the time. The Urmia, or Urmia, North Iran version of the Bible is essentially the American Bible translated into modern Aramaic. By the way, the American missionaries have translated all the Bibles of all the countries of the world from the American Bible. That is why all the Bibles thus translated contain the same errors in translation and pseudo-Christian doctrines that have caused so much misery in the world for 200 years. Okay. So, this Disciples' New Testament, or the Aramaic New Testament, is then the only accurate and non-prejudicial translation of the original New Testament scriptures by a native Aramaic speaking translator. So it affirms that the American missionaries were there. Can't hear me. The Assyrian population of the town of Urmia itself was only 600 people, or about 100 families. They lived in a special Christian quarter of the town. It is estimated that around 1900, 40% of the population of the region was Christian, Assyrian and Armenian. The uniqueness of the Urmian community was that it was located, that it was highly urbanized and westernized. This was essentially attributed to the presence of various foreign missions in the region. Actually, the foreign missions would have preferred to be located in Muslim communities in order to take the Christian message to them. The Persian government did not allow them to do so for this very reason. At the same time, the government was interested in courting the English mullahs, as its officials used to call them, in order to obtain better trade or political concessions from the foreign governments. The satisfaction of foreign governments. Moreover, the royal family in Iran was interested in familiarizing itself with the Western ways of life through the missionaries. So the Assyrians of Urmia were a compromise solution to a measure of intellectual enlightenment to the Assyrians. They were a mixed blessing. Okay, so the Assyrians of Urmia were a compromise solution to the satisfaction of all. Thus, the community in Urmia became the centre of rival missionary activities in the country. Although foreign missions brought educational opportunities and a measure of intellectual enlightenment to the Assyrians, they were a mixed blessing. The privileged position of the Assyrians made them a subject of envy and resentment to their Muslim neighbours. The unified Church of the East became dissected into various Protestant, Russian, Orthodox and Catholic denominations. Moreover, the younger generation became alienated from their ethnic traditions and was trained in skills for which economic opportunities were scarce. So, if I remember rightly, Victor N. Alexander hinting at they basically gave up their traditional Assyrian status as Saraya and went and became Christians under these missionaries. Yeah, along those lines. Okay, they went into these different religions, that weren't originally theirs. So they lost they gave up their Saraya status or their title. Right? Moreover, the younger generation became alienated from their ethnic traditions, the Saraya, and was trained in skills for which economic opportunities were scarce. In 1905, there was a total of 201 schools with 5,084 Assyrian students in the region. Considering that Assyrians lived in only 120 villages, the number of schools indicates that there was more than one school in some villages. The following is a breakdown of schools administered by different missionaries and the number of students accommodated by them. There it is there. With the beginning of World War One, the rate of literacy among the Assyrians of Urmia was estimated at 80%. This is a remarkable high rate of literacy for the time, even by the standards of an urbanized centre in the West, let alone a rural area in the Middle East. At the time, there were more Assyrian physicians in Urmia than all of Iran. Assyrian professionals under supervision of the foreign missionaries staffed all missionary schools, newspapers and hospitals. The first mission school opened in 1836 under the direction of Reverend Justin Perkins. Prior to that, the native Assyrians did have a few schools of their own. The one in Urmia was in the village of Gogtapa, where Modosi Pilgrim Hormizd had hired a learned Assyrian from Tiara to educate a number of children there. The missionary Perkins was pleased to see the missionary Perkins was pleased to see the thirst of the Assyrians for education. He was impressed to find how fast the children learned to read, write and memorize long verses from the Bible. The first so-called textbooks were in the form of lessons written on cards. In the absence of notepads, children used their fingers to do their manuscript writing, arithmetic exercises and small sandboxes. The first Assyrian teacher was Reverend Priest Abraham the nephew of Hormizd, who was educated in the above-mentioned Gogtapa school. After learning to read and write, the Assyrian children began to teach their parents to do so. In 1843, the American mission also opened a college in Seir, a seminary for women called Fisker Seminary. Later in 1880, the mission opened a medical hospital in Urmia. There was also a town college called Sadari, which was for the rich and admitted Jews, Muslims and Christians alike. The Assyrian schools were open to non-Assyrians who could attend with the permission of their parents. In spite of the fact that at the time the local Muslim population considered the Christians religiously unclean and would avoid close association with them, there is evidence that non-Assyrians did attend such schools, as evidenced by the graduation reports. For example, the end of the year report at one school lists a total of 35 students, among whom 10 were Muslims and 6 were Jewish. Moreover, there was an all-Muslim school in Urmia run by Assyrian teachers under the supervision of Dr. Shed. In time, the curriculum of the American mission schools became westernized. In the 1906 issue, Kokva, the sole Assyrian non-denominational newspaper, published a report with regards to the graduation ceremony of the American Mission College and high school students. While the report praised the high quality of students' presentation in foreign languages, it lamented the total ignorance of these students about their own history. In subsequent reports, we read how parents sat patiently during the graduation ceremonies, listening to the presentations of their sons and daughters in English and Farsi, that's Persian, not understanding a word of what was being said. As unlikely as it seems, between 1906 to 1914, the Assyrians performed Shakespeare's Macbeth in the village of Golpashan, several plays by Molière, translated by Kasha Mushi Babala, in the village of Golpatalikan, where the Catholic mission had built large schools. Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice and several plays by Gogol, Russian playwright, were staged in the town of Urmia. Interestingly, men played the role of women in these plays. Kokva spearheaded a move to establish a non-denominational school by the Assyrians themselves, where their curriculum would be under the control of Assyrian educators. Martoma Aldo's grammar book and the arithmetic text by Rabbi Pierre Mirza were judged to be superior to translated books. Eventually, in the winter of 1908, an independent Assyrian school was established. From the 3 plays that this school staged in 1909, it is obvious that the educational goal was the emphasis on issues and subjects relevant to the local Assyrians. In other words, the goal was to stress the Assyrian values and their overall philosophy of life. For instance, the first play was a mock debate between a Western and Eastern philosopher, each expounding the merits of his own perspective. The second was a play written by Rabbi Yosef Ishak. It was about a family where the wife pushes her husband to go to Tiflis, work there and send money home so that she can have a lifestyle comparable to that of her neighbour. In Tiflis, the husband falls prey to the vices of gambling and drinking, and the family is plunged into deeper poverty. This play must have touched the raw nerve in the audience, as it reflected the harsh realities of life. The third play depicted a group of young men whose village is looted by the Kurds. They get together and make a vow to unite and exonerate their families by facing the thieves and bringing the loot back home, which they do. Among the nationalist Assyrians was Rabbi Binyamin Asanis, a writer and a playwright who wrote several plays that were staged at different times. This independent school did not last very long and had to shut down a year later. The reason was, first, the students were more interested to learn foreign languages. Second, the parents preferred the denominational schools because they were subsidized. Yeah, they got paid off for it. They got money, and therefore cheaper. Kokva attributed the failure of the independent school to the lack of unity and dedication on the part of Assyrians themselves. So it was back to dependency on mission schools, and all that the Assyrian nationalists could do now was to urge the American mission schools to postponed foreign language education until higher school grades. After the failure of the independent schools, a group of Assyrians formed a drama group. Among the activities was the staging of a play called Sira Tuhumneta in Shamiram, which was performed in several villages in 1914. Evidently, the title of the play suggests that the Assyrians were searching for their historical roots. Contrary to the American mission, the Catholic Lazarists and the Anglicans made their teaching of the classical Syriac and the vernacular mandatory in their schools. The result was the emergence of a group of Assyrian Syriac scholars such as Paul Bejan, Abba Solomon de Hukma, Havil Zia de Mavana, Mir Aziz de Khosrava, Shamasha, Yosip de Kalata, and others who contributed greatly to the field of Syriac studies. Martoma Aldo, the Metropolitan of the Catholic Mission in Urmia and Salamas since 1892, was a great scholar who, in addition to various publications in classical Syriac, also authored and translated several books in modern Assyrian. The majority of these scholars were murdered during the 1915 massacre or the 1918 flight.